Hello and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and this evening I was just about to go out for my evening walk through the countryside, and I said to my son, I don't even know what I'm going to record my podcast about. And my 6-year-old son said, do blackgrass, Daddy. And so I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. So this podcast is all going to be about growing weeds hydroponically and why you might want to do that. So at Eutrema, we have a project where we grow a type of weed for arable crops hydroponically. And this weed is called blackgrass. And blackgrass is a massive weed in the UK. It's the number one weed of arable crops, cereal crops, wheat, barley, oats, things like this. And it can't be controlled with herbicides in the UK because we don't have GM crops, and the herbicides that work in non-GM crops are not effective, and it spreads dramatically. And so we need another way of solving this problem. And so at Eutrema, we've come up with new technology that uses a sort of biological weapon against it to stop it growing. So it doesn't kill it, but it stunts it, stops it growing, and then the cereals overgrow it. And so we produce this in the lab, and we've been testing it for a few years now. And if it works on blackgrass, then we will roll it out to other weeds. And we've chosen blackgrass because it's a massive problem around here in Northamptonshire where we're based. It's the number one weed of arable crops. In fact, if you ask the general public in the UK, though, about blackgrass, they'll never have heard of it because it doesn't affect homes and gardens. If you ask the general public what was the number one weed, they would say Japanese knotweed or nettles or something like this, or dandelions. But it's actually blackgrass is the number one weed. It's not poisonous. It doesn't harm the plant itself. It's not parasitic, but it is just starves the crops out. They call it the foot and mouth of arable crops, foot and mouth disease of arable crops. So it's a really important disease. And we have this stuff that we grow in the lab. We grow a mildew and a rust, and we give these to farmers to trial out on their fields and see if we can incorporate it into conventional growing systems. And so where does hydroponics come into this? Well, we need to test whether the technology works in the lab and in the grow rooms. So you have to expose blackgrass plants to the pathogens that we're creating in the lab. They're not genetically altered pathogens. They're just pathogens we've harvested from the fields around here. One was from a pond, and we grow them in the lab, and then we test them in our grow rooms. And so that's one of the big things we do at Eutrema. And it's, if we can solve blackgrass, we'll be billionaires, and I'll be flying in a helicopter everywhere. So fingers crossed. We work with a number of partners to get this technology out there. But as I say, we need to grow the blackgrass in the laboratory, and I think we are probably the best people in the UK at growing blackgrass, because I have been to a few universities and research organisations where they've got blackgrass projects, and their blackgrass looks rubbish and doesn't grow very well. And it just something about weeds, when you try and grow them in greenhouse conditions, they don't thrive very well. There's a famous song by Pulp, lead singer Jarvis Cocker, called The Weeds. And it says, weeds, they do not thrive in hothouse conditions. And Jarvis couldn't have got it more correct. When you try and grow weeds, they don't grow very well. And so that's why we use hydroponics, because we tried growing them in sort of bagged compost, like all mix type products and cocoa, and they just succumbed to poor growth, aphids, and I think they succumb to a disease called take-all as well, which is hard to diagnose, but plants die off every now and again due to it. And the vast majority of blackgrass plants in the wild have got this take-all disease, and I think it's on the seeds. And so with hydroponics, we can clean the system really quickly. We can sterilize the root system. We can kill off that take-all disease off our weeds that we're trying to grow and keep fresh and grow until we can actually expose them to the pathogens we want them to be exposed to, which is rust and mildew. These are specific fungi that don't attack any other type of crop. They don't even attack different types of wheat and things like this. So you don't need to worry about any products coming from Eutrema about mildew spores and things like this. They're very specific spores. And they're called forma specialis in mycology, these types of fungi that only attack one type of plant, whereas take-all, ergot, if you've heard of these diseases, they attack lots of different types of plant. Think of potato blight. That also attacks tomatoes, I think, as well. Phytophthora infestans, that's a species that attacks lots of different ones. So we grow them hydroponically, and we grow them in an NFT system now. We did just do hand watering for a while in cocoa, but that wasn't good enough. We really need to go to a full NFT system. And it also looks good as well. So when we have any visitors, it's always good to have an NFT system. As I say, the beauty of this sort of technology that we've got here at Eutrema is that we can then, because it only attacks one type of plant species, we could then expand it and do other types of weeds. So we could go on to other arable weeds next. And unlike normal herbicides, where if you're trying to develop a herbicide, you want to kill the plant, which we're not trying to do. And also, you want broad action. So you want to kill as many different types of weed as possible. But the problem with that is that you can also kill your crop. So this technology only attacks the one weed species. So we do a lot in hydroponics, and we do a lot in horticulture at Eutrema, but this is our main play, our main research activity in arable crops, and it does involve a lot of hydroponic growing. So we get the best of both worlds. And so we got a large grow room. We expand it every year, and we grow more and more of these blackgrass plants. The good news is we don't have to bother with flowering and fruiting, because we don't want these plants to flower and fruit. We just want vegetative growth and propagate them and produce numerous plants. They are actually quite difficult to grow, as I said. They're difficult to germinate. They have these seeds that are really static, and they have this hair on them. And we once took the seeds to a school and put them on a Van de Graaff generator, and they just all attached to the Van de Graaff generator by these hairs. And you took wheat seeds on a Van de Graaff generator, they'd all just fall off. So it was really cool, and that showed why these weeds transport around the country so easily, because they just attach to machinery that are any static sort of electrode charge on them. So that's blackgrass. That's how we grow it hydroponically. And what else can we say? It's a grass species. So grasses are silicon hyperaccumulators. So we always have to make sure we've got enough silicon in our growing media. Whereas when non-grass species, what we call dicots, like hops and chilies and tomatoes, there you do need some silicon for good healthy growth, but calcium is your main go-to strengthening element. Whereas in grasses, up to a third of its dry weight can be silicon. So if you haven't got silicon in an NFT system, you're going to be struggling to grow a healthy grass species. And we want our plants to be as healthy as possible, because we really want to test these pathogens and make sure they are actually good for infecting the plants. And then we might add a bit of UV to even test it even more, see if the pathogens can tolerate UV. And then we might also want to test our formulations of our spores to see if we can improve their ability to attach to the plant and their ability to withstand natural UV in the environment. So we have various chemicals, almost like plant sunscreens, that we can put on them that stop the biology in the formulation from being exposed to UV and damaging, because fungal spores, when they're germinating, any sort of biological on the surface of a plant is really sensitive to UV. So if you've ever sprayed a biological onto a leaf, you also want to apply it on cloudy days in dusk, unless you're indoors, because UV will damage them. So if we can put UV on and then test our sunscreens, that would be fantastic. So we've developed a number of sunscreen type products, and they're not based on titanium dioxide, which is what human sunscreens are based on. They're based on plant nutrients and chemicals that are plant nutrients that also can absorb UV light. And that's important, because in humans, you couldn't use these compounds because you'd stain all your body with all these different chemicals, and you'd look a bit of a loon. You'd look a bit like an Oompa Loompa, really, if you put these sorts of chemicals on. But in plants, that's fine. Plants don't mind, because it's much more dilute, and they don't mind if you stain them to look like an Oompa Loompa, especially if you're giving them nutrition. So what else can I say about blackgrass? Not much. That's about it, really. I have grown a number of weed-type species in the past as well. I grew nettles. I grew fields of nettles for making into fabrics, textiles, and that was interesting. The main problem was farmers saying, "Oh, I can grow nettles." It's like, Yeah, you can't grow nettles. We need a field with nothing but nettles in to make it worthwhile. So that was interesting. What other weeds have I grown? I think that's probably about it, really. If you know of anyone who's grown hydroponically a weed species, then let me know. There are some plant species that are now weeds that were once arable or field-based crops. So fat hen, I think that's Chenopodium rubrum. Not Googled that. That's off the top of my head. So if it's wrong, I apologize. That was brought over to the UK by the Romans, and it's thought that it was actually a crop, almost like quinoa or quinoa, whatever you want to call it, or buckwheat. And then it's just naturalized and become a weed in arable crops. But it could be a potential one for hydroponics because it is a dicot grain, and they're always sexy and of interest to food manufacturers and health foods because all of our grains are normally monocots, grasses, and so things like quinoa, buckwheat, perhaps fat hen are always of interest and high value. So if you're looking for a high value crop, then potentially fat hen is one. What other weeds could you grow? Dandelions? In dandelions, they do grow loads of dandelions for herbal medicine and for food. And whereas in the UK, you would never think of growing them. Obviously, dandelion and burdock is a drink that we drink here. And why else might you grow dandelions? You can extract the rubber from the white sap from them can be used to make like a type of resin, might have some niche uses. In Asia, I think in China, they do also grow shepherd's purse, which is like a brassica related to Arabidopsis. And that is definitely a weed in the UK. You would not say otherwise. But shepherd's purse is eaten as a sort of winter vegetable, a bit like lamb's lettuce in China. Come on, let's think of some other weeds that you might want to grow hydroponically, Russell, off the top of your head. I guess there's a few medicinal plants that might be classed as weeds. There's a plant called self-heal that grows in my lawn, and I think it must have some sort of medicinal use because it's called self-heal. Ribwort plantain, I think that's got some medicinal uses. It's also got some interesting fibers in it. What else? I don't think speedwells or anything like that got any uses. I think Japanese knotweed even can be eaten, a bit like rhubarb. I think it's related to rhubarb. It can be eaten. It's not poisonous, Japanese knotweed. And so, but I think there's enough Japanese knotweed around that you wouldn't need to grow it hydroponically. Same with giant hogweed, potential use as a biological weapon. They're banned now, aren't they? So you can't have a biological weapon, apparently. What other uses could we have for weeds? You could grind them. In America, giant knotweed is ground up, and Marone Bioinnovations, I don't know what they're called now, but they made that into a biofungicide and a biostimulant. And that was a weed species. Bulrush, that's an aquatic plant. I don't know if you class it as a weed. The pollen of that is used to feed beneficial mites, and it's sold by Coppert in Europe as a sort of an added feed for beneficial mites when there's no pests around in greenhouses, so you can sustain the population of beneficial mites. Mosses, they're a big weed of lawns, and if you could grow mosses hydroponically, then that would be a massive win for one sector of horticulture. But let's talk about that tomorrow, because I think that could be a good episode all on its own. Moss cultivation in hydroponics. So if you found this useful, if you know any farmers who've got blackgrass, share this with them. If you're a farmer who's got blackgrass, then you owe the person who shared it with you a pint, and also email me to find out more information about our project. So until tomorrow, that's been Hydroponics Daily. And stay tuned for tomorrow's episode where we're going to talk about moss growing in hydroponics, which there is quite a lot of, interestingly. It involves prisoners. So yeah, that's whet your appetite. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.